When you don't have 20 minutes to watch a full review, when you're not looking for a how to play or an hour-long playthrough, and let's be honest, when the interest is a little lower too, that's why we have 6 small box games for you. Hey, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co, and we are doing another 6 small box game reviews for you. We have a bunch over here. They're all okay-ish with caveats, pros, cons, things worth trying, things that might stick around for a bit, and things that are definitely leaving right away. But let's go ahead and dive into these, starting off first and foremost with Echoes from Ravensburger. Echoes is one of those mystery games. The general idea of this is you have a game. This is the Cursed Ring over here. I think they have 4 or 5 of these already. But the idea of this is there's a mystery to unravel and to solve, and the way you do that is you have 6 chapter cards, you have 18 story cards, and then you have to go ahead and scan them, and you get little like 5-second audio snippets, and together you piece together a story by associating each chapter heading with the 3 things that led to it. When you do so correctly, you'll get the unlocked audio sample. So you may have had, like, 5 seconds, 5 seconds, 5 seconds, 5 seconds, but you might end up with like a minute-long actual story segment that you had bits and snippets of them. If you get it wrong, then I'll just tell you, hey, you got some of this right, some of this wrong, as you continue to try to sort them together. So basically, you're scanning 24 cards, getting the snippets, and then trying to piece together a story in some degree of sequential order. That's the premise over here. It's fun. I enjoyed it. I think it was a little tedious to some extent because you're constantly replaying audio snippets to like figure out where they lie in the story. And when you do finally solve it, you have to listen to all those audio snippets plus extra. So the actual story was fun. It was engaging. I started off, I puzzled some things together. I got the right chapter cards. I missed the right heading card. Once I lined it up, I was able to get everything else going in order. Then I was able to get all and unravel it. I felt a little clever. The whole thing took maybe half an hour, not even half an hour, 20 minutes or so. It's a fun little puzzle. I think it's fine. I think it's rewarding. I don't think it's amazing. I think the audio thing is a little bit of a gimmick. I'd say if you have the opportunity to try it, by all means do so, but I think there are better games to go ahead and, get without that. So, like, if you're at a convention, if you try this, if your friend has a copy and you want to borrow it, I do think it's worth the 20 minutes you're going to put into it. I just don't know if it's the best on the market. 3 out of 5 for me. Then we have over here, we have Cheating Moth. Cheating Moth over here is a game in which you're cheating. You're basically literally cheating. You're going to have a whole bunch of cards over here. Let's zoom in a bit further over there. You have a bunch of cards that you're playing with, and the cards have little rules, and the general idea is you're trying to get rid of your hand of cards. So you have these cards, and whoever gets rid of their cards first. And there's abilities. On your turn, you play a card, but only if it's within one of the other cards. So if you have a 3, and you played a 2, I can play the 3 on top of the 2, or on top of the 4, but I can't play it on the 1 or the 5. So there's some degree of restriction, but at the beginning of the game, it's not that much of a restriction. Plus, cards trigger abilities. Maybe I play a card, and then everyone slams their hand on the table, and someone can get rid of a card, or give a card to another player. So there's fun little chaotic abilities in play, and that's where the game comes in. Because the chaos allows you to hide the fact that while slamming your hand down on the table, you also dropped one of your cards on the floor, or tucked it up your sleeve, behind your back, in your hair, wherever you want, in the hat, jacket, wherever. Flinged it across the table. Put 2 cards down at once. You are allowed to cheat to get rid of your cards. The goal of the game is get rid of your cards first. No one said you have to do so legally. Most games you have to do so legally. In this game, named Cheating Moth, you're encouraged to cheat. Delightfully fun. Like, genuinely, this is easily the most fun game on the table today, just in terms of pure fun, not necessarily strategy. If you're just looking for pure chaos and fun, this is the most fun of the 6 games we're going to talk about today, and I think it's very charming, very rewarding. I think it's very gimmicky too, because obviously you're dumping cards on the floor. It is great for a laugh the first time you play it. It's great for a laugh the second, the third time you play it, and you start to get more clever, and I think it works well with higher numbers. 3's okay, but really I think it's going to thrive more at 4 and 5 players, as the chaos allows you to really sneak things. One player is always the guard. They're watching the cheating, and they benefit if they catch someone cheating, because that makes sure that someone always more invested in stopping players than actually being the one cheating. And you can accuse people. You have to be honest if you were accused. It's a bizarre, fun little experience. I think this is one of those games that I'll keep playing until the fun runs out. Now, I do not know when that will happen. I don't know if if the fun's going to run out in 2 months. I don't know if the fun's going to run out in 3.5 years. But I will keep playing this until the fun runs out. Right now, it is a gimmick for sure. It's chaos. It's just craziness. But it is a fun gimmick. Fun chaos, fun craziness. It's a 3.5 out of 5. This is going to stay on my shelf until it stops being fun, which I anticipate happening. I just don't know when that will be. Then we have, let's go back to this side over here, we have Gap. Gap, going to be from Arcane Wonders. This is a game where you basically play cards to take cards so that you can have the biggest gap between your cards, if that makes sense. Basically, when you play a card over here, you're going to take the cards that are adjacent to it. Well, you're going to either take all the cards the same number, or the cards that are adjacent to it with, the similar numbers on both sides. So if you play a 3 next to, a 4 and a
5 or 4 and a 2, you can go ahead and take some of those cards based on the adjacency in numbers. Now, the goal of the game, the reason you want to be mindful of what you take, is because when you take cards, then the color you have the most of counts. Let's say you have 4 green. Well, that counts as 4 green. And if you have 1 yellow, and that's your lowest number, that's a gap of 3. The problem is if you have 1 yellow and 1 blue, then your smallest numbers combine. So 1 yellow and 1 blue is worse than 1 yellow. It's better to get a second blue, because then you have 2 blue and 1 yellow. Yellow is your lowest number. But that works in the reverse direction too. If you have 4 green and 4 yellow, that counts as 8. So your highest and lowest, if you double up, they go higher, which is bad for the low numbers, is good for the high numbers, but that results in an entirely exact, precise way where you're trying to gather cards to your tableau, which does result in an interesting challenge. It's a fun little numbers game, a little bit of mind games, a little bit of playing the table, playing the cards, knowing what's in play. It is a game that definitely involves some strategy, but it does feel like a game to a large extent where you're playing numbers on the table to fulfill some arbitrary goal, meaning it feels like a mass market game. This is from Arcane Wonders. Again, I think there is strategy to this. I think there is cleverness to it. It is a game you will get better at as you play, but ultimately it kind of feels like you have a hand of cards and you have an arbitrary rule set around how it works. It's fun. I enjoy it, but I don't think I'm wowed by it. It's a 3 out of 5 for me. I think it's a clever little game, and I think that I prefer other small box cleverer games, if that makes sense, meaning I think this is a good appeal to a mass market game, and I'm here for the no thanks and the Colorados and the 4 sales. Gap is good, not great, a 3 out of 5. Then we have, let's go with Unboxed over here. Unboxed is a weird one for me. I'll start off the gate, this is going to be a 2.5 out of 5 for me. That's going to start with the rating. But I do think it's worth trying if you have the opportunity to do so. Similar to Echoes before, I think it's worth trying. It may work better for you than it did for me. I think there's a little bit of PTSD involved in this one for me. Not to diminish the term. Actual PTSD has its own connotations, but you'll see what I mean. You'll see what I mean over here. Unboxed is an escape room game with, I believe, 10 adventures. I say I believe because I think I stopped around 7 adventures in. I got to a point where I was like, you know what? I've seen enough of this, and it's getting frustrating, not rewarding. But then again, I played it 7 times, so I mean, it's not the worst game by any means. But the premise of it, and the premise started off better. After my first puzzle, I thought I was totally in for this one, and the more I played, the more I noticed the system I got. The premise of Unboxed is that you are solving ancient games effectively. In each of these scenarios over here, you're going to have components. And then you have those components. Look at that little horse picture. Look at those cards. Look at that card. Look at these tokens over here. The components you have to figure out what the game is. So you are given components. You're given like 1 or 2 cards that might have hints or sequences or things on them. And then you have to deduce how to play the game. That you're basically exploring temples and you're trying to deduce how other ancient civilizations played games, and so you find their pieces and you're like, oh, look at this, there's a chessboard, and look at these pieces in this board. I know how to play this game, I figured it out, here's a playable game. And to its credit, ironically, the game does give you there's 10 playable games in this box outside of the actual game that it is, because they genuinely give you playable games. I'm not saying they're good games, but they do give you theoretically playable games with the pieces and the components that are at play. But in each of those games, you try to solve the puzzle. You're given a bunch of pieces, you're given like a card with some images that might illustrate how ancient civilizations played it. Then you have to answer a few questions, and those questions will basically tell you, what by answering the questions, your goal is not necessarily to figure out everything about the game, although you usually can do so, but rather to answer specific questions, which in and of themselves, the questions might also help guide you. That's the premise. It starts off fine. The first puzzle, pretty straightforward. It's just getting you up and running. And the puzzles get harder and harder as you go, adding more components and more ways to try to figure things out. I played this, like I said, maybe 7 or 8 times. I don't know. I know I got mostly into it, but I also didn't finish it. I both kept playing it, so take that for what it's worth, while every single puzzle felt like reading a bad rule book every single time. The irony is that's the point of the game, right? That is the point of the game. The point of the game is to try to look at not enough information to figure out how to play the game. Genuinely, this game, the more I played it, the more it was giving me the frustration I have when I am faced with a actual game with all the components and not all the information I want to be able to play it. So, to its credit, it felt like what it's trying to do, but playing this game felt like reading a bad rulebook. It felt like trying to learn how to play a game. That is what I do every single day. I played 391 games in new-to-me games. I played 391 new-to-me games in 2023. I am learning enough bad rulebooks. I don't need 10 more. So that's the feeling I got from it. a weird impressiveness and also frustration in this box. The part where I do think it's worth being mindful of is, in my opinion, not all the puzzles were like, that's obviously how you play it. I think they gave you enough information that the answers could be how you played the game, but there could be other answers. It's kind of like if I'm like, hey, look at this, 2, 4, 6, 8. What's the sequence? And you're like, well, the sequence is obviously, if I said 2, 4, 8, if I said, hey, here's the sequence of numbers, 2, 4, 8, what's the rule? And you're like, the numbers double. And I was like, that's correct. But also, that doesn't have to be the rule. The rule could be any 3 even numbers. The rule could be any numbers that are going up in sequence. There's a lot of rules. The rules could be any non-negative numbers. It just happens to be that 2, 4, 8 fits a lot of rules, and the one that's implied is not necessarily the one that's guaranteed. Meaning, a lot of the puzzles, I think, gave you enough information that you could have gotten to the right answer, but you also just as plausibly could have gotten to a different answer, and hey, you didn't get the right answer. So there's also that aspect. But again, genuinely felt like reading a bad rule book. So I think it's worth trying. Like, if you not buying, I think it's worth trying. If you have the opportunity to go out and get your hands on this one, I do think it is a clever twist on the genre that felt too real to my day-to-day for me to love. Then from there, let's go ahead and back to Fisheries of Gloucestor. I always feel like I'm saying, like, I think it's because of like things like Worcester, like Worcester is Worcester, so I feel like Gloucester should be Gloucester. I have no idea how to pronounce his name. Fisheries of Gloucester. Gloucester? I have no idea. Anyways, Fisheries of Gloucester from Dr. Finn's games. This is a game of trying to basically spread out across the island by placing polyomino pieces down that are effectively your pathway on the islands, but also could be anyone's pathway. Meanwhile, you're trying to gather fish and sell them for points and for abilities on these cards every single round. So effectively every round, you're using a certain action economy of points, using those points towards movement, towards placing down tiles, and towards gathering various ability cards to be able to score points and get more abilities. That's the general idea of the game. I think it's totally fine. I think it does a good job. I think it's a satisfying experience. I think that across all marks, Fisheries of I'm just going to call it Fisheries. Across all marks, Fisheries is a fun experience that does a fine job, and I've had fun playing it. It didn't necessarily wow me in any category. It just checked the boxes of, here's a game, here's a puzzle, here's a sequence, and it did a fine job. I had fun playing this game, but I just don't think it would be at the top of any of my recommended lists at all. It just didn't necessarily stand out. It did the job. It's a fun little puzzle. Nothing wowed me about it, but it also was totally fine by every standard out there. It's a 3 out of 5 for me. Nothing wrong with it, but also nothing to necessarily shout out and recommend. And then lastly, we have Trickdraw over here. Trickdraw from Good Games Publishing. This one is, I think if Cheating Moth is the most fun game at the table, I think Trickdraw is the most strategic game at the table, with a bit of chaos mixed in too. I think the chaos games are winning today. Trickdraw is going to have you placing cards. Every turn you draw a card, and then you either play a card face up or face down. When you play the cards face up, you're going to be activating abilities every single round. Like so over here, once per turn, discard 1 to flip any card. On reveal, choose up to 3 of your face-up cards, flip them face down. Now the goal of the game is to get 10 points. Face down cards are worth a point, face-up cards have abilities, but the right combination of abilities and points can actually work even more in your favor, meaning the maximum value of a card is not necessarily a point from being face down, rather it's combining abilities and things that will be turned face up, and suddenly, boom, you get an extra bunch of abilities because you have 3 rally cards face up, which each rally card is worth a point for every other rally card, and if you turn 3 face-up cards, you can go straight to 9 points from 0. Well, not from 0, from 3, because they were face down before. Either way, generally the goal of the game is to draw a card, play a card, utilize the abilities to time flipping your cards face up or down where it suits you, flipping your opponent's cards face up, face down where it suits them, and trying to mess around with the abilities to keep your opponents down and usually to bring yourself up, but I'd say more importantly to be able to go in for that killer win. And the thing about the game that keeps it interesting is there's 2 ways to win. There's an instant win where you get 2 out of 3 cards, but there's also the more common win, I'd say, and doesn't matter how many points you have. If you just get 2 out of 3 cards, you just win. Specifically, there's 3 cards. If you get 2 of them, you win. But the other option is to win by getting 10 points. Well, not by 10 points. Game end is triggered by getting 10 points, but then every other player has an opportunity to jump forward and get a higher score. All tied scores are eliminated, so you can actually win by making sure to tie other people up perfectly, which gives a little bit of advantage. Well, we'll talk about that in a second. But basically, 10 points triggers endgame. That player gets 2 more cards face down for another 2 points, and then the other players have an opportunity to go ahead and take one last turn to try to eclipse them. So sometimes you're flipping over a few cards to jump from 5 to 10 and trigger endgame. Other times you're keeping those cards face down so that when somebody else triggers endgame and they think they got the win, you suddenly jump from 8 to like 17 because you flipped over the cards and you grab that win. So there's a fun little degree of chaos, of card management, of knowing your own cards, of being mindful of your opponent. Lots of fun little things going on. My main critique against it from a strategy perspective is I think the person who goes last, that last player, I think has way too much power to basically control things or mess with things in a way that nobody else does. So the very last person to play in the entire game, I think has more control than I would like to a large extent. Past that, very little fun. Past that, a fun little game that gives you enough decision space and enough chaos to be an overall good time is a 3.5 out of 5. And that's what we have over here. We have a 3.5 for Trickdraw. We have a 2.5 for Unboxed, although try it if you have an opportunity. A 3 for Echoes. A 3.5 for Cheating Moth, which will stick around over here until it stops being fun. We have Gap at a 3 out of 5, and we have Fisheries at a 3 out of 5. Those are your 6 small box game reviews. Until next time, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. Hope you enjoyed this video, and as always, I hope you have a good one.